Let me tell you a bit of a story about when Mario Odyssey was first coming out and my expectations for the game, because of course I was looking forward to Mario Odyssey because it looked absolutely fantastic, but also I was concerned that the game might not necessarily land 100% because not too long before Mario Odyssey came out, another 3D platformer collectathon came out that I completely loved, that being A Hat in Time. Remember, this was 2017, which, in my opinion, was the best year for video games like ever. Approximately 16 gazillion incredible games all came out in 2017. And A Hat in Time was one of them. That is like one of the best 3D platformer collectathons I've ever played. And so after that game, I was like, oh, did Hat in Time steal Mario Odyssey's thunder? Is this game gonna still be able to do it for me? I don't know anymore. But then the game came out and I played it, and it totally did. Not a problem whatsoever. Mario Odyssey is also one of the best 3D platformer collectathons ever made, and it was a wonderful experience. So back to back, I got two of the best games in this entire genre, in my opinion, and I was a very happy camper, let me tell ya. But that was back when the game first came out. I have not touched Mario Odyssey since then, so I was really looking forward to coming back to the game just to replay it because it's really fun, but also to, kind of reevaluate things and see if my thoughts on the game have changed at all. And they have a little bit, slightly, now returning to the game all these years later. Because while Mario Odyssey is a fantastic game, no doubt, when you come back to it on the second playthrough, a lot of that magic from the first time experience is gone. A Hat in Time also suffers from a similar thing. The first time you play that game, it's like the greatest thing ever, but on subsequent playthroughs, it just doesn't have that feel anymore, that magical, wonderful experience of discovering everything that these games is about. That's a big part of the reason of why they're so good. And so when you're already familiar with them and you're just coming back to play them as games, then suddenly they don't really seem as spectacular as they did when they first came out. One thing that really stood out to me with Mario Odyssey this time around is because I already knew about how once you beat the game, then the moon rocks appear and then that adds a whole bunch of new moons to every kingdom. This time around, I decided not to really even bother with collecting very many moons on the initial playthrough. I would just wait until after I've beaten the game, and then all the moon rocks are there, and then all the moons of the entire kingdom would be there, so that way I could grab them all in one go. And so initially, when playing through Mario Odyssey this time, I just basically mainlined it, just focusing on doing the story stuff, and just getting enough moons to get to the next kingdom and just blast through the game very quickly. And doing that, I found that I think the, core main game playthrough of Mario Odyssey isn't really that strong. It's good, for sure, but it's not the most amazing thing I've ever played. It definitely doesn't compare to, the main linear story-focused gameplay that you get in something like the Galaxy games. Odyssey's strength as a game definitely lies in the more sandbox stuff, whereas when it tries to do more linear, focused platforming challenges, it's not quite as good. It's still very, very good, but not as good. Similarly, the first time through Odyssey, I felt that the bosses were pretty fun and clever and used the mechanics of the game well, and I do still think that's the case, but the actual fights themselves are pretty pedestrian for the most part. Not really that interesting or special or anything particularly that's gonna blow you away or whatever. That's in comparison to the core gameplay, running, jumping around, collecting stuff. You know, the bosses are still fun, they're alright, but they're definitely not the strongest part of the game at all. So honestly, playing through Mario Odyssey again and just focusing on the base story content, I was kind of feeling a little bit disappointed in the game coming back to it, going like, I guess maybe it's not as fun as I remember it being. But that's only because I was just focusing on the weaker part of the game in that linear stuff. Once I got to the post-game and I started collecting all the moons and stuff, that's when the game started to really become as fun as I remember it. 3D platformer collectathons are one of my favorite genres of game in general. I grew up on all kinds of those games as a kid, and I've always just really, really enjoyed them a lot. And Mario Odyssey is in many ways like the best version of that you could possibly imagine as far as a platformer goes, because the movement in this game is just glorious. You have so many different ways you can move, so many different jumps, so many different moves. Triple jumping, side jumping, the dive, rolling, the ground pound into the roll that you can do for an extra burst of speed. Obviously jumping on your hat's a really big thing that you can do. Long jumping and then throwing your hat, diving on it, jumping off of it, diving again, and just getting all this crazy distance. Doing a high jump into jumping off your hat, off of a wall jump, into then throwing your hat to turn yourself around to dive back and just climb walls super ridiculously easily. And of course all the shortcut stuff and opportunities that this opens up for various different ways to get around. The movement in Mario Odyssey is absolutely unprecedented for a game like this, and it is just so much fun to just move around in this game. It's wonderful. And there's so many tiny things about the moveset in this game that, they really did not need to do at all, but they did. For example, when you throw your hat and you jump right as soon as you catch it, then that's another way that you can do a high jump. Why did they put that in the game? You have already, 4 different ways to do high jumps. We really didn't need another one, but they put another one in, and it's awesome, and I love it. And, if you catch your hat while you're in the air and you jump, then you get, a tiny little pop-up you do. It won't really give you much height, but it'll kind of extend your air time just a teensy little bit. And it's that's so completely unnecessary. Why did you even put that in the game? I don't know, but it's the best. I love it. You can also, ground pound and then throw your hat to throw it downwards, and, there's so many little tiny nuances to the moveset in this game. You have such an insanely gigantic amount of things you can do, and it's just awesome. No 3D platformer has a moveset this robust. The only thing I would say about the moveset that I do find a bit disappointing is the spin jump in this game works like how it does in Super Mario 3D World, as opposed to how it did in Super Mario Sunshine, because the spin jump in Sunshine is the greatest freaking jump in any Mario game, and if you could have the Sunshine spin jump in Odyssey, whoo boy, that would be incredible. By the way, as a Sonic fan, I do have to point this out. Why are the rolling and slope physics in this game better than they are in, any official 3D Sonic game ever? It's got everything. You gain speed as you go downhill, but if you roll downhill, then you'll gain even more speed, and you'll slow down as you go uphill, and you can preserve that speed in order to jump longer distances and stuff. And you play this shit, and you're like, why the fuck is this Mario game doing Sonic shit better than literally every Sonic game has ever done? What the fuck? Oh yeah, while we're talking about the moveset, it's worth mentioning that I have actually never played Mario Odyssey using the motion controls before, because I really don't like using the Joy-Cons and I don't have a Switch Pro controller. So I use a converter that lets me use an Xbox controller on Switch, so that's what I've used both times I've played the game, so I've never even touched the motion controls in this game. I don't even know what they do, really. But what I can say is that they're completely unnecessary for beating the game, and even getting all of the moons, as I've been able to do both without any issues. And I don't really feel like I'm missing out on very much. You already have a hugely varied and massive, robust moveset that I can't really see much need for any other moves or abilities or anything, really. Sometimes some of the transformations you can do, I do feel like I could benefit from maybe the motion control abilities, but honestly, I really don't have any issue with it. That said, I do still want to play the game one day with motion controls and see how those work, and I did just buy a controller that has motion control capabilities, but that was after I already finished my playthrough of Mario Odyssey, so no motion controls here, but that's perfectly fine if you ask me. Plus, from what I've heard, a lot of people just don't like the motion controls in this game, so I don't feel like I'm really missing out on much of anything. So yeah, moveset in Mario Odyssey is incredible. One of the best controlling and best feeling 3D platformers I've ever played, with such a varied and large moveset that it is just a joy to do stuff in this game. And then, of course, on top of that, you have the capture mechanic, which adds a whole other universe of stuff you can do to the game, and it's just like, this game's ridiculous. It's actually, like, too good. Even if sometimes the actual platforming challenges and stuff you're doing in the game aren't the most engaging thing in the world, they still manage to be really fun just because it is that enjoyable just to run and jump around in this game. And like I said, the game really comes into its own when you are exploring around these big old levels trying to find as many moons as you possibly can. That's when the game is most certainly at its best. Because there are moons goddamn everywhere, there's just so much stuff to do in this game. You can't walk 10 feet in any one direction without having something to do to get a moon. And that's just great. There's just a million things to do, a million ways to platform around, use your moveset, do a bunch of cool stuff, complete challenges, etc., etc. I guess I should probably mention that as a fan of Collectathon 3D platformers, pretty much any time I do play a game like this, I always go for 100% because it's just really fun most of the time in most of these games. You know, getting all the jiggies in Banjo, or getting all the stars in a Mario, or yada yada. And so, of course, playing Mario Odyssey, I want to get all of the moons. And because there's so many, there's just so much stuff to do, and it's fantastic. I know a lot of people criticize this game for having too many moons, and then that feels like they're not really valuable, they don't really mean anything. But, I mean, realistically, none of these collectibles in any of these kinds of games are actually valuable. They're just a way to motivate the player to do things. You know, getting the power cells in Jak and Daxter isn't fun. What's fun is the challenges you have to do to get those power cells. And I feel the exact same way with the moons in Mario Odyssey. Yeah, there's a lot of them, but that just means there's a lot of things to do. I personally don't feel that their abundance has any impact on their value, because their value is exactly the same. They function as a thing to motivate me to engage with the game's challenges. It's not like I go for 100% in these kinds of games because I have some weird obligation to do it. I do it because the process of doing it is enjoyable because the games are fun to play. And getting all the collectibles is just the game's way of making you do all of these fun things that the developers have created. That said, I still do think that there is a problem at this game with having too many moons, not because it devalues an individual moon's worth, but because it's very clear that they were not able to come up with fun challenges for every single moon. As there are a lot of moons in this game that are kind of just whatever, or they're just like there and you just get them for nothing, or a lot of ones that are kind of annoying, or just like redoing the same thing over and over and over, and it's not really a particularly fun one. Like the one where you have to look through the telescopes to find like the flying taxi or the flying sphinx. It's like, okay, you do that once and then you've done it. And then it's the exact same thing every time you do it in every other kingdom. It really doesn't have any value at that point. We've already done this. Or like you have ones like this where you have the Goomba lady over there that you need to bring a Goomba to, and she's just there, and you're like, okay, so I have to get a Goomba from back over here, and then just run it all the way over. You know, in my head, I've already done what I need to do to get this moon in a matter of 3 seconds, but I have to just go through the actual physical process of slowly running a Goomba across the desert, and it's like, okay, I mean, this isn't really very fun, I'm just doing it just because it gets me a moon. That's what I think the real problem with Mario Odyssey having too many moons is. There's just a lot of moons that are really not that fun because they're like, we gotta hit 880 because every other Mario game had 120, and so 880 plus 120, it makes 1,000, so we gotta have the inverse number of how many moons as typical Mario games have stars. I guess, that's just my assumption about why there's that specific number of moons in this game. And it's like, you really didn't need to have that many if you didn't actually have ideas for a full 880 moons. You didn't really need to do that. Especially considering there's a lot of moons that are just like straight up nothing, like the achievement-based moons that just don't do anything, like 90% of them you're just gonna get passively by playing the game, so it's effectively just free moons. And also, the fact that you have to redeem every single one of these moons individually is like, are you fucking kidding me? You couldn't foresee this being a problem and just let the player collect all of their moons from Toadette at once? Like, seriously? Also, the game does that annoying thing where anytime there's like a race or a time challenge or something like that, then you have to do it twice to get both moons. There'll be just, completed initially, and then you have to do it a second time in order to, like, complete a certain time in order to get the second moon. But even if you complete that time the first time you play it, you still don't get the moon for no reason, so you just have to do it again. There's a lot of stuff like this in the game where it's just like, you didn't need this to be this way. Not that I think this is a huge problem in particular. Most of the time, the worst moons are just kind of tedious to get, but they're not really that much of a problem. They're not that annoying or that unfun or anything. It's just kinda, whatever, just do what you gotta do to get the moon, which is unfortunate, but thankfully that is definitely the minority of the moons. The vast majority of them are fun to get. Although, special notes about the fucking volleyball one where you have to get 100 hits. That one is fucking atrocious. The first time I played this game, that took so fucking long to do, and it was so unfun, and it was just like, god damn it, I just want to go back to playing Mario Odyssey and stop playing this stupid, shitty volleyball crap. Fortunately, this time around, I was able to get it on my second try, so it wasn't too bad, but still really stupid and annoying, and this shouldn't be in the game. And I know a lot of people feel the same about the jump rope challenge, but I never thought that was a problem at all. Both times I played the game, I did it very easily. This time around, I did it on my first try. So overall, my thoughts in terms of moons are that I don't have a problem with the sheer number of them in principle. I think that's fine. It's just that the number of them is such that it basically becomes impossible to design 880 fun challenges to do in a game like this. And so they were forced to fudge a lot of the moons in order to hit that number, when in reality it probably would have been better if they just didn't do that. But at the end of the day, getting all the moons is still overall a very, very enjoyable experience, and like 90% of the moons are really fun to get. So not a huge problem, but just kind of, every time you run into one of these moons, it's just like a tiny little blemish on the game, where you're like, that could have been like a real moon, or alternatively, nothing at all, because the gameplay of it is such that it doesn't really add much of value to the game. So it's basically the same as if it's nothing. Another thing I want to address that I hear a lot of people criticize this game for that never even crossed my mind when I first played it is how easy the game is. A lot of people seem to really, really take issue with the low difficulty of Super Mario Odyssey, and I can understand that on paper, but since when has 3D Mario ever been difficult at all? Or for that matter, since when has any 3D platformer collectathon ever been difficult whatsoever? Like, this is a genre that has historically always been for children. I never hear anyone complaining that Banjo-Kazooie is an easy game, and it's the exact same type of game that this is. I mean, I do agree, I think this game could have been better if it was a bit more challenging and put more of this robust moveset to proper use, but I don't come into a game like this expecting or wanting challenge. For me, when I play these games, the main thing that I'm trying to get out of them is kind of just an enjoyable experience. Like, talking about Hat in Time, that's a game that's really not very great from, like, a gameplay perspective, necessarily. Like, the platforming is all very simple and very basic, the challenges are also very easy. There's really not much to that game as far as gameplay is concerned. But it's the charm of the game, it's the humor, it's the style, it's the experience you have of talking with the NPCs and hearing all the funny jokes. That's what you really play this kind of game for, if you ask me, and Mario Odyssey is the same way. It definitely leans more into the gameplay direction because it does have more of, like, real platforming challenges, and you do have a much wider moveset of different platforming moves that you can do. But still, generally, like, this is not a very gameplay-heavy game to me, this entire genre of the 3D platformer collectathon. This is a genre I play when I want to kick back, relax, and have a fun time moving around a fun 3D environment. I certainly would be interested in a 3D platformer collectathon that actually was a challenging, fun, intense platformer, but considering that, like, almost no games in this genre are like that, I can't really say that I have much issue with it on principle because I already love this genre as it is, when none of them are challenging particularly. So it's not that I think anyone's wrong for having an issue with this game's difficulty, I just find it to be a peculiar criticism because I don't hear that same criticism for any other game in this genre. Of course, there is also the darker side, but I honestly don't really like the darker side in this game because it's not really very difficult. It's actually fairly easy. Like, the challenge is a little bit ramped up from the general game, but really what you have to actually do in Darker Side, it's not really that hard. The difficulty of it comes from how punishing it is. The fact that if you make any mistakes, really, you have to do the whole thing over again, and it is a very long challenge that you have to go the whole thing without making any major mistakes. That's where the difficulty of it comes from, but the actual platforming itself, it's really not that hard. And so the result of that kind of weird difficulty balance for me was that the first time I played Darker Side, I was really getting very bored with it because a lot of it is just doing the same stuff over and over until you finally manage to get through the whole thing without making any mistakes. Which for a difficult challenge, that would be perfectly fine, but with Darker Side being relatively easy for the most part, it's kind of just tedious having to replay these easy challenges over and over to the point where I'm just sick of doing them. So the first time I played Mario Odyssey, I was really not very happy with Darker Side. After finishing it, I was just like, thank God that's over, because that was fucking boring. But thankfully, and this is kind of a testament to show exactly what I'm talking about how it's not difficult, this time around, I was able to do it first try because I remembered what I had to do already, so it was just a matter of doing it, which is really not hard. I mean, yeah, it's got some challenging stuff in there for this game's standards especially, but, you know, as far as hard platforming goes, it's really not that much of anything. And because of that, I was really disappointed when I first played this game because I was hoping for a really cool, difficult final challenge, and instead, all I got was a very annoying and tedious final challenge that I really did not want to do. But I did it, and I did it again on this second playthrough here, and it was, like I said, no problem, so I guess whatever. Yeah, getting all the moons in Mario Odyssey, it's a fun experience for sure, but to be honest, it's a bit much. I guess this is another criticism you could give the game for how many moons it has. It takes so fucking long to get through this game if you want to get everything. Like, the initial playthrough, if you just want to do the story, is only like 4 or 5 hours or something like that. But to get all the moons, it takes like 20 or 30 hours or whatever, and that is a lot. You know, typically a game like this, you can probably get everything in maybe 10, 15 hours, something like that, even less for older ones, and it's a lot of stuff. I mean, it's not really that much of a problem, because it just means there's a ton of really fun game to play. But this isn't a game that I'm going to be coming back to very frequently to do playthroughs of because of how much a commitment it is. You know, it's going to be a pretty rare experience that I come back and decide to collect every moon in Mario Odyssey, because boy howdy does that take a while. And I think one of the strengths of collectathons like this is how short they are and how it's a very casual, light experience to just jump into one, play through it, maybe get all of the stuff if you feel like it. And generally, in most of these games, you can do that in just a couple of sessions. I remember back in the day, I was able to beat Jak and Daxter 1 in just one sitting. It only took like 4 hours to get all the power cells in that game. And I saw a number of people on my Bowser's Fury video saying that kind of thing and why they like that game so much, because that has all the same kind of fun that you get in Mario Odyssey, but in a much more compact and tighter form. So you could really just load up Bowser's Fury whenever you want and just play that, which I definitely think that game is much stronger than that, and I would probably say every other 3D Mario is stronger in that than Odyssey. Because unlike all those games, if you want to do a full playthrough of Mario Odyssey and get all the moons, that's not just a quick little thing that you do for a couple of days. It's a thing. It's a commitment. It's gonna take a while to do. Though I can't help but think that people who are kids now, they are so lucky to get to grow up with a game like this. If I grew up with this game would have been my life. I would have dumped countless hours into a game like this as a child, because I already did that with a lot of the 3D platformers I already had. But with a game this big and massive and robust, with so much stuff to do and just so fun and wonderful in so many aspects, I would have never stopped fucking playing this game. I would have lived in this game as a kid. Anyway, that was quite a tangent there, but getting back to talking about the difficulty and challenge of Mario Odyssey, another reason I personally don't feel like it's really not that much of a problem that this game isn't hard is because I am someone that does really enjoy hard games, but the reason I like hard games primarily is because they are games that force the player to engage fully with every aspect of the game. You know, there's a lot of games that have, like, systems or mechanics or features that you really don't need to pay any attention to or think about at all, and you can get through the game just fine. Like, off the top of my head, Pokemon is one, where there's, like, a bunch of nuance to, like, Pokemon stats and all the systems in the game and stuff. But for the most part, to my knowledge, in a lot of Pokemon games, if you just, like, type match, then you can just breeze through the entire game, and it really becomes nothing. And a lot of games have stuff like that, where they kind of just squander the systems and mechanics and features that exist in the game. They just never really take much advantage of them, and that's why I like difficult games, because difficult games generally do take full advantage of what the game can do. But despite the fact that Mario Odyssey is a pretty easy game, I think they do a fantastic job of getting as much mileage as possible out of all the game's different features and mechanics. I mean, first of all, Mario's moveset can be put to plenty of use for all kinds of shortcuts and skips and just lots of fun messing around with his moveset. Because the game is open-ended in sandbox-style levels, the fact that the linear platforming challenges don't really ever ask that much of you is fine, because you have plenty of opportunities to use your full moveset for just more efficient exploration of the big sandboxes. You've been watching my gameplay here, and you can see that pretty much all the time I am rolling around everywhere. There's nothing that necessitates me doing that, but it's just the fastest, most efficient way to get around, and along with that, I'm always doing stuff to try to speed up my movement or try to do this or that in a more efficient way, trying to optimize my routes through the levels and trying to take as big as shortcuts as possible and all kinds of stuff. There's plenty of room to fully get lots out of the movement mechanics of Mario Odyssey just by playing the game. And I feel that with the captures, they do a really good job with all the different challenges in the game to really squeeze as much game as possible out of each and every different capture and what they can do. You know, they use the same one capture in so many different ways a lot of the time. They really leave no stone unturned as far as the game design goes. If there is a creature with some kind of ability, there's almost always some kind of challenge for a moon in this game that uses that ability in some weird way that you wouldn't have expected, as well as the standard ways, as well as other different ways that are just kind of neat and interesting. For example, my favorite capture in the game are the Pokios. I think that these are really fun and really utilized in lots of really good, interesting ways, because, you know, the thing with these is that they can poke their beaks forward and they can use that to climb these paper walls in the Bowser's Castle level. And of course, that's naturally used for all kinds of vertical platforming, sticking your beak in things, trying to climb up different surfaces, but also you use it to, like, go around corners and do all kinds of weird platforming movements as well. And then you have stuff where you have to climb these thin surfaces where all you can do is just poke into it over and over. You have moving surfaces that you have to use, like just the ability to poke into walls is something that's very well utilized with this thing. But then on top of that, the poke itself can also function as an attack, and they use that as well, where you have to, like, shoot these bombs into these bricks in order to break them. And then you have challenges like this, where you have, like, a whole course, and you have to try to angle it so that way it goes around the slope and it hits the thing and gets you the moon. And it's like, this is a totally different way of using this thing's mechanics, and it's fantastic. And pretty much every capture in the game is utilized to this same degree, and other features of the game as well, like the little scooter thing that you can ride, that's also very well used in many different ways for many different things. This is one of the benefits of the fact that the game has so many moons. There is so much variety in the gameplay in this game, and it's all so clever and so smart, using all of the same tools that you use for everything else, but just in really interesting different ways that you wouldn't necessarily think of. Like, there's stuff in this game where I literally could not even imagine what more you could do with these features. They basically do everything you can think of. Sure, they could have used these things in more challenging ways, but honestly, I think that the way they do it is pretty good, where they use it just enough to get this idea across and explore it and have some fun with it, and then we move on to something else. The game never lingers on any one idea for too long. And I think that's probably the biggest reason that I think this game is so excellent, because it is a genuinely, insanely well-designed game. It is so smartly put together. It has a lot of really fantastic ideas, and it does pretty much everything with them that you can possibly do, and 90% of what it comes up with is really fun and enjoyable. There are a couple of misses here and there, but it's definitely not enough to detract from the overall experience. That, I think, is what I really got most out of Mario Odyssey on this second playthrough coming back all these years later. While the magic of the game has definitely worn off on me at this point, now I can look at the game not being wowed by all of the different things that it does. Now I can look at those things that it does and how it does them, and I can appreciate just how well designed this game is. And while the magic of that first-time experience with this game is gone for me, I will never forget what that first-time experience was like, because it really was something truly special. And echoes of that experience still most definitely exist for me. Like, when you're doing the New Donk City Festival, I don't know what it is, but something about that sequence, it just all comes together so perfectly in a way where I get genuinely emotionally worked up just playing through that part of the game. I don't know, it just kind of like perfectly encapsulates like the fun of Mario and of playing a video game. It's just a celebration of having fun. It certainly helps that the song there is like the frickin' best thing ever, and so that really hits you very hard. And of course, the ending of the game is really something else. That moment when you get to the end and, Bowser is knocked out there, and when you're first playing it and you have that realization, that moment where you're like, wait a minute, I know what to do, and you throw Cappy on Bowser, and that cutscene plays, and then now you're controlling Bowser, it was really, really something. It's a moment where the game, everything, it all comes together absolutely perfectly to create this joyous, wonderful experience that caps off a fantastic adventure in all the right ways. It's exactly what I was saying before, how the game leaves no stone unturned for fun stuff it can do. The concept of throwing your hat at enemies and then you get to control those enemies. Of course, the big, final, awesome payoff of that is getting to control Bowser himself. It's so natural, so obvious when you come up with this game's premise, and yet at the same time, it's so exciting and wonderful. And again, you get that whole vocal theme going at the end, and it's awesome, and the whole final ending sequence of the game really is some of the best shit you're ever gonna do in a video game. I made that whole video comparing Mario Odyssey and Sonic Unleashed together, and yeah, they do have a lot of similarities, and one of those similarities is how this is kind of one of the first Mario games to do, like, the big, crazy, over-the-top ending. Galaxy did that as well, kind of, but the execution here, the specific way it's done, it is very, very similar to what you see in the Sonic games and many other Japanese forms of media. And right off the bat, the very first time they try to do it with Mario, they absolutely nail it. And then once you get to the actual whole ending of the game, then you get that final cutscene of Mario, and it's like, oh, is he gonna propose to Peach? The whole, like, wedding aesthetic of this game all comes to a head here, and then it's all just for a big joke. Because really, it's Mario, and it's just about having fun and being a fun video game. That's all that really matters, right? But the whole wedding thing does a great job of making this feel like a much bigger and heavier game than any other Mario game, and it's just so fantastic. The fact that you go to the moon as well, it plays up well off of the whole globe-trotting adventure thing that this game does, but also on top of that, it works well because of how it's teased throughout the game. There's a lot of iconography with the moon very large in the background, especially in the first kingdom you go to. The fact that, they put the twist on, instead of collecting stars, this time we're collecting moons, and then we have the Broodals, which are rabbits, which it's common in Japanese folklore and stuff, that rabbits hail from the moon. And so the whole game is teasing that we're going to the moon, and then when you finally do, it feels so awesome and epic. Literally every single thing that this game goes for in terms of, like, its aesthetic and its feel and, like, the whole story setup premise, It does absolutely everything perfectly. Like, there's actually literally no flaws with the story of Super Mario Odyssey. It's not much of a story because the Mario games aren't about story, but it is just enough to enhance this really fun game and make it something really, really special. And in my opinion, this kind of leaves the Mario series in a bit of a weird place, because at this point, I'm just left to ask, what do you do next? Where do you go after this for 3D Mario? Like, we had Bowser's Fury, but that's just like a small little thing. I mean, like, what is the next step for 3D Mario? What is the next big mainline Mario game going to be? How could you possibly top this? Mario Odyssey is a game that, like, takes every single ounce of potential that the Mario series has, and it realizes all of it. Like, there's nothing left. There's nothing that hasn't been done with this game that you can do with Mario. This game is like the peak of what Mario can be, and so how do you follow this up? You can't do better than this, surely not. I think the sequel ship for Mario Odyssey 2 has already sailed, and I highly doubt they ever had any interest in doing something like that. So the next time we get a 3D Mario game, it's gonna have to be something entirely different, and I just have to wonder, what on earth could you possibly do to deliver a Mario game better than this? It almost feels like this game is, like, too good, like there's nowhere left to go with Mario anymore. I mean, I'm sure there is. I'm sure you can come up with something, but, I mean, hey, maybe that's the reason it's taken so long to get another 3D Mario since Odyssey. Maybe they're really struggling to come up with something that could possibly outdo Odyssey. I don't know, but I am certainly very, very curious to see what the next big mainline 3D Mario could possibly be. One other thing about the game I really, really like is the way that it references the past, you know, the quote-unquote nostalgia stuff, but I really don't feel like it's that nostalgia-based in the case of this game. To me, the way this game makes references to previous Mario games feels more like a respect for the past, a respect for where Mario came from and what led to the series being what it is now with this big, grandiose game. Because the game doesn't just make references to, like, the original Super Mario Bros., it has references to, like, everything. The original Donkey Kong obviously is heavily referenced in New Donk City, but in a very tasteful way, you know, bringing back Pauline and the fact that it's kind of reworked everything to be like a Donkey Kong-themed city. The way Pauline talks to you and she's like, hey, Jumpman, you know, referencing Mario's original name of Jumpman. The fact that you have, like, the original Donkey Kong artwork on, like, graffiti and posters and stuff in the background. Peach's Castle has a lot of tasteful references to Mario 64, just small stuff, like the fact that you get Yoshi on the roof and stuff like that. Also, the costumes have tons and tons and tons of references to so many obscure little Mario things all over the place. Like, this game just shows so much love for Mario itself, and I think that's really, really lovely. To me, it goes beyond just like, hey look, it's the thing from previous Mario game, nostalgia. And it's more like going and saying, like, yeah, that thing turned into this. That little arcade game of the little pixel man climbing up to get the gorilla, that's now this incredible, amazing experience, and it celebrates that fact, and I think that's really awesome. I guess before I go, I'll quickly talk about the art and music. Music-wise, of course, the game is very good, but it's not the most incredible stuff I've ever listened to in my entire life. Outside of the 2 vocal tracks for the game, I really wouldn't listen to any of the music in the game outside of the game itself. It's just not really stuff that's that catchy, in my opinion. It works as background music for the game very, very well, but, you know, whatever. And visually, of course, I think the game is stupendous. I really, really love the art style of this game, and I love how varied it is in particular. I've seen a lot of people that really take issue with stuff like the realistic humans in New Donk City or the weird fantasy dragon that you fight at that one part of the game. You know, people saying that that's out of place for Mario, and of course it is, but that's the point. You know, this game is about exploring the world, going to different kingdoms, and meeting different people, you know, very foreign people to what Mario is used to. That's the idea. The reason that the New Donk City people look like weird normal humans is because that's supposed to show that Mario is in a place very out of his element, very different than where he's normally supposed to be. That's what I think is so great about the art style in this game. Every kingdom almost feels like it's from a different series in a way, and I think that does a really great job of making this feel like we're going to very, very different places with Mario, that he's going on this big explorative adventure to places he's never been before. You know, even the cartoony stuff like the Luncheon Kingdom, this looks very un-Mario. Like, this is not what Mario worlds normally look like. This is something very, very different. And even though the New Donk City people are realistic, they're still very, you know, exaggerated in a certain way. The fact that we have realistic people in such a bizarre scenario, and the fact that they talk with, like, that weird pitch-down speech that sounds all goofy, like, there's definitely still an element of fun silliness to them. The contrast almost makes them as cartoony as everybody else. By the way, if I were to pick a favorite kingdom in the game, it would probably be the Wooded Kingdom. I really, really love the whole environment here. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. This, like, weird dome where, like, in the distance you can see, like, that we're on some snowy mountain cliffs, and we have all these robots putting together this beautiful environment with all these woods and flowers everywhere. It's a very, very lovely place. Very relaxing, very nice mood. I really, really dig it a lot. And by the way, does anyone else think that this place looks exactly like Planet Wisp from Sonic Colors? It's, like, completely identical. Don't know if that was an intentional nod or not, but boy howdy, that is, like, one-to-one the same thing. Oh yeah, one last thing is Luigi's Balloon World. That wasn't in the game when I first played it, because I played it at launch, so this was my first time giving this a shot, and honestly, it's not for me. I really don't care for stuff like this. I could see people getting into this, and it was kind of fun a little bit, but not really something that I'm gonna be devoting much time to. There you go, another video gushing about how Mario Odyssey is like the best frickin' game ever. There definitely weren't enough of those out there, so I'm glad I could help fix that problem. Maybe next I'll do a video about another under-reviewed game, like Ocarina of Time or something like that, because, you know, not enough people talk about that game. It's pretty obscure, but it's really good. Anyway, thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time.